talk. I'm not going to do long introductions because we've done that in the advertisement for the talk. And I'm going to just sort of give the stage to Parmesh, okay? And then between Parmesh and Dhamini, we'll show the TikTok videos. And then after Dhamini, I'll kind of ask Arvind to speak, okay?
So when you give it to me, I have to talk for about 10, 15 minutes, is that?
I mean, what would you prefer? What do you like? Read and talk a little bit. If you're feeling, I can also engage you if that's what you want.
No, I'm happy to.
We'd like you to talk.
I'll talk.
We're letting people in.
Because in Zoom, it's better if people just talk and nobody
I'll
gets...
talk and I'll read for about 10 minutes. Yeah.
Yeah, perfect.
Okay.
You know it? All right. C minor.
Welcome, everyone. Welcome to Das, a Monday Fixed with Das in Goa. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. It's really exciting today because I see so many friends in the audience. And today's panel is very exciting for me because it's very close to my heart. And you know, Parmesh's book is giving us an opportunity to revisit the queer movement, where it stands today. So much has happened in the last 2 decades, particularly the last couple of years. And we're trying to grapple with all these changes, you know. And our panel is very interesting because along with Parmesh, we have Dhamini and Arvind, who are all chroniclers of the queer movement in India right now, and have been. And it's interesting because I wanted to sort of mention, you know, that possibly the first book that was written about the queer movement as a sort of a political manifesto was written in 1992 by the late Siddharth Gautam. It was called Less Than Gay. And it argued for various things the queer movement needed to do for LGBTQ inclusion. And many of those, and I feel like they are crossing that list that Siddharth Gautam left for us. So we've done away with 377. And Parmesh's book comes at a really great juncture where arguing for corporate inclusion in the country or economic inclusion. When soon after Navtej, just in this year, 4 separate challenges have been filed asking for same-sex marriage in India, 3 in the Delhi High Court and 1 in the Kerala High Court. And it's interesting because Less Than Gay documented a very important story. It was from 1988, where Leela and Urmila, 2 police constables from Bihar, were part of an army battalion, decided to get married. They were a lesbian couple who were in love, but they didn't do it secretly. They publicly announced their wedding. So they went to a temple, their families came, and they did a small ceremony, they exchanged garlands, and of course the entire battalion found out. And the immediate consequence was they were both fired. There was no procedure followed, no show cause notice, notice was issued, no due diligence. They were asked to leave. Not only that, they were actually, their bags were packed and they were left in the railway station in the night and instructed to leave that entire area and never to return. And writing in Less Than Gay, Siddharth Gautam sort of expresses this sort of deep outrage that not a single person from the human rights community in the country spoke for Leela and Urmila. Not just even if there was a shame attached to their lesbianism, the public lesbianism, the fact that they were discharged without any due process. And, we've come a long way from that illegality. And I think, Parmesh's book sort of is situated in such a great juncture today, because I think the idea of corporate inclusion validates in many ways, and I want to ask Parmesh to comment on it and all my other speakers as we go along, validates the claim for same-sex marriage and further inclusion and equality. So I think it's going to be a really interesting discussion. We're going to have we'll start with Parmesh, and every panelist will speak for 10 to 15 minutes. And after that, we'll open up for questions and answers, and I really hope we'll have a really exciting discussion. You all know Parmesh. Everybody knows Parmesh, and I've known Parmesh for a very long time. In 2008, Parmesh wrote Gay Bombay, and what a journey, Parmesh, from writing Gay Bombay to writing Queeristan, and your work with you have Gay Bombay with you right now, wonderful, and your work with the Culture Lab, and reading the book has just been so exciting. I mean, just to see, it's really interesting. I wanted to say that. The narratives of inclusion and employment that we see from the West are adversarial, about LGBT people fighting in courts, asking for them to be included. And what you show us a really interesting method of dialogue, that you actually start dialogue with people, because inclusion can happen through dialogue. And I think what I love about the book is that it's a sort of a template on how to do these dialogues. And obviously on your incredible energy to do these 100 meetings in a month. But it's really very, very exciting. So, and just very quickly to introduce, Dhamini is a very dear friend. Dhamini is an associate editor and writer with the Hindustan Times. Dhamini has been writing, really looking back at some really important events in LGBT history and connecting them to our successes in the struggle today. And I'm very excited to announce that Dhamini is actually now working on a book on the movement, sort of a biography, a history of the movement. And I really hope Dhamini will connect that also. And Arvind Narrain is my old friend and in many ways my mentor. And Arvind has written some really important documents on and important books on gay rights, Because I Have a Voice, which he co-edited with Gautam Pan, Law Like Love, which he and I put together, Queer Despite Sexuality, also your entire summary of the judgment, which is a very important document you put out. But Arvind and the Alternative Law Forum connects human rights work with sexuality rights in a way that very few people in the country have done. And so I'm really excited, and thank you all for being here. And Parmesh, a few housekeeping rules, sorry, quickly. We'll ask everyone to stay muted, please. And if you have any questions, I'd request that we'll take question answers in the end. And please put your questions in the chat box. And we will also put a lot of stuff on chat box about all our running programs. We have no funding, and Reggie, Nilankur, and I do this on our own by creating free time from our actual jobs. So we would request you guys to look at the InstaMojo link we'll put up slowly. We recommend a 200 rupees donation per talk. It'll really help us. And I want to thank Eco Postro and Edible Archives, our two partners. All our panelists get a gift voucher from them. So yes, it's exciting. There's a gift. There's a gift involved. Yes. So Parmesh, please take us through the book, Parmesh.
Thank you, Alok. I was hoping you'd do a rapid fire round and make the three of us fight for a hamper, but clearly that's another show.
It's called Coffee with Alok.
Well, not coffee. If it's Alok, then something stronger. Speaking of which, where is your glass? I thought that, these evenings were all about, the intellectual conversation. Very good. I'm very, very happy to be part of this session with you, Alok, with Arvind and Dhamini, all of whom I admire so deeply. All of us have in different ways. Someone should take a picture of that, yeah. Documented different parts of what it means to be queer in India over the years. Also Alok, Reggie, Nilankar, the entire Thus team in Goa. Thank you for that lovely slideshow at the beginning. It was like a mini history lesson and set to such beautiful music as well. I wish we were all together because I see Sopan and so many other friends as well on this. But hopefully, within a few months, we will be all together. What I want to do in the next 10 minutes or so is give a very quick overview of the book and also read a small section as a way of opening up, possible directions that Dhamini and Arvind might want to go into. Or of course, we could go in completely different directions and then, that's the fun of it, right? The book is essentially a big Bollywood-style business book. It's mass, and it was written with that intent as well. And thankfully, it has found multiple audiences, which is also what we were going for as well, right? Queer people, straight people. It's already being used as a manual in companies to create better organizations and in business schools and MBA programs, especially. It's being taught as part of HR courses as well, and that's very much what one wanted to do. And which is why I wrote it in that particular format, right? Of a memoir meets manifesto. Large parts of it are about my own life, and we start with that because I kind of wanted to take people on this journey by plonking them direct in the middle of action, in this case, in my life, thinking of Hema Malini coming down, wearing a pink feather boa, singing Mere Naseeb Mein, right? So, clearly from that beginning, you recognize this is not a typical business book. Most business books don't start that way. But, I wanted to set people in that context. What does it mean to be an effeminate gay boy growing up in Bombay and then suddenly having this life where you're at MIT one day and then living this very surreal thing with Sir Ian McKellen, or my pal Ian, who kind of proposed to me in Bombay the other day, or Ellen Page or Sonam Kapoor, right? So I wanted to put all of that in, again, with great intent to take people on this surreal journey as well, because it has been very strange, right? And, whether it's my parents, my love life, full of songs and dances, it's very much in there because I wanted it to be deeply personal and kind of grounded. But in addition, there's also the background of law, the various legal, again, snapshots, not entire elaborate theses, but snapshots, right? What are the various terms that we call ourselves in queer India? Our multiple queer histories, and in that, what histories are we not talking about as well when we've historicized the movement? So looking at all of this surrounds the spine of the book, which is essentially a business book, which gives you 4 reasons why inclusion is important, which is it makes you more money, it makes you more innovative, it helps you attract the best talent, and it improves your reputation. So 4 broad reasons. Of course, besides the fact that it's a decent thing to do, but in today's day, we have to talk about these other things as well, because decency by itself, I think, needs support these days. Just a matter. These are the times we live in. And then 6 steps that companies can do to become inclusive. So 1 chapter, 1 step, and so on, right? Right from everything from partnership benefits, gender affirmation, active hiring, it's all there. all of this accompanied by many other voices in the book, right? So not just my voice, not just the businessy part, but all these other voices, whether it's people I meet, whether it's people from various parts of the movement, whether it's parents, whether it's allies. So it's a big, noisy Bollywood masala style book. And again, I wanted to even, I mean, I chose this format because in a sense, I wanted to queer the idea of writing a business book. Because I said, business books are written in a particular way. This is a business book about being queer, but how can we also queer the writing style? So which is why this strange mixture of English and having all these different voices, right? The title is very important. It's my affectionate title for an India that is queer friendly and inclusive. Now, it's not just an imaginary homeland. In fact, I believe that we are creating facets of this inclusive India, whether in, through our attempts through the law, whether it's the increase in accepting parents, whether it's more and more colleges and schools being progressive and so on. I've particularly chosen to keep the tone of the book deeply positive and optimistic with great intent. And there are many reasons for this. First is, again, there are scholars and friends like Brian Horton and Anjali Arondekar, who I quote in the book, both of whom have written about how when we tend to write about queer India, we need to get out of these tropes of suffering and misery and also talk about celebration, about fabulousness, about multiple ways of being queer, and not all of them are linked to, sadness in terms of experiences or outcomes, right? And I think secondly is especially in the times that we're living in, and especially for the audiences, which is, business people, people who are hopefully going to read this and change their policies, etc. I wanted very much the book to serve as a useful toolkit. And I wanted to do that by showcasing success stories and not, the disappointments, etc. Because I wanted to show people that, change is possible. And look, right? So that's why the book is full of success stories, right? There's companies like Tata who are empowering the trans employees like Anubhuti, whose story is a vital one in the book, or the Lalit group of hotels who hired 100 queer people in the past 2 years, or state governments like Kerala, etc., which attempted with Kochi Metro to step up towards trans inclusion, or even individuals like Grace and so many others. I mean, Grace started the Sandeep Nagar Collective recently after this book came out. I wish, she'd done it earlier so it could be showcased in the book. What a brilliant idea, and what a great way of doing a public-private partnership where you can create win-win scenarios, right? Everyone benefits in that. Private companies, the state, trans individuals, there is dignity, there is a new model of thinking, and they sell the products in the marketplace as well. So truly win-win, right? And I want to talk about so much of this win-win scenarios that we can build, right? Because there is amazing work that is happening in India, whether it's queer job fairs, whether it's intersectional organizations like Dalit Queer or Project or Queer Muslim Project, whether it's all these festivals happening not just in Bombay or Delhi or Bangalore, but all over, like Awadh in Lucknow, or in different parts of the Northeast, right? Or Queerabad and Ahmedabad, or so many, right? Whether it's queer sports champions like Duty Chand, whether it's even an engagement in politics, whether it's Priya Patil of NCP or Disha Pinky Sheikh and Bahujan Agadi, right? So I write about all of this to talk about the possibilities that can come. And one of my favorite chapters, though, is about queer families. And this family theme is something that kind of runs through the book as well. So I talk about, so the book is full of accepting families, not just blood families, but also families of choice. So when we create our own, whether we create our own families of choice, as many of us do, whatever part of the LGBTQ spectrum we are, or if our own blood families accept us, it's really, really very, very powerful. And I've tried to put a lot of these stories at the heart of this book, right? Data that appeals to your mind, but also these deeply, deeply personal stories of love and acceptance, whether it's gay weddings that are taking place in the country that have been happening, throughout. They may not be legally recognized, but they're happening socially. Whether it's mothers, I'm going to read one particular story, if I may. There's this other great story of Kusuma and how, who's lesbian, and she comes out to her mom, and her mom is not even crossed 10 standard and only knows Kannada. But how the Kusuma's mom accepts her, and now how every weekend essentially Kusuma, her partner, and her mom spend weekends together cooking and chilling at home, right? They've created their own idea of what it is to be in a family, right? So it's all of this is also happening in India, and I kind of wanted to showcase that. So I'm going to stop talking now, and have I crossed 10 minutes?
Good, Parmesh. It'd be lovely to hear us read something on the book now.
Great. So I do want to read. I want to read an excerpt from this chapter called "It's All About Loving Your Children," and this is a reversal of the Karan Johar title of of Kabhi Khushi Kabhi Gum, where it's all about loving your parents. Karan wrote in that, and I've kind of flipped it and actually said no, it's actually all about loving your children, queer children, all your children as well, right? So there's a small excerpt that comes towards the end of the book. In January 2018, the Dancing Queens returned to the Culture Lab after their debut 2015 performance. This time on stage, we had the mother-daughter duo of Mangala and my friend Abhina Ahir dancing together. It took Mangala from a middle-class Maharashtrian family 8 years to accept her child, who was born to her as her son Abhijit, but gradually transitioned into Abhina. Currently the Associate Director of the India chapter of HIV/AIDS Alliance, an NGO, Abhina had struggled with her gender identity since childhood. Mangala was a single parent, and she blamed everything from Abhina's pursuit of dance to the absence of a father figure for Abhina's feminine nature. She even took her to saints and temples in the hope that her child might change. But over the years, as Abhina resolutely transitioned and became her own true self, Mangala stayed by her side, learned and understood. Today, Mangala is Abhina's biggest champion and a key member of Swikar parent group. A week after their performance at the Culture Lab, she went on to receive the 2018 Queeros Award given by 6 Degrees, an LGBTQ network that honors Indian queer heroes and their allies. On stage at the Culture Lab, they swayed to the song Ma from the 2007 Bollywood film Tare Zameen Par. The 30-something Abhina and the 60-something Mangala moved gracefully and in sync to, and these are the translation of the lyrics, don't send me so far away that you won't be able to remember me, mother. Am I so bad, my mother? A big fat tear fell on my laptop as I wrote this. I write in the book. If you have some tears, it's okay. Go on, let it out. I want to read a little bit from the end, which is essentially what drives home the point that it's all about loving your children. Actually, it's all about loving, period. Love is love is love, as the fabulous lesbian singer Bidisha Mohanta likes to sing out loud wherever she can. Her parents went on national television on the show India's Got Talent, in which she was participating in 2018, and they accepted Bidisha for who she was. Millions of other parents across our country saw this and learned. During an explosive 2013 Frankly Speaking discussion with the TV anchor Arnab Goswami on Times Now, I lashed out at Rahul Ishwar, a controversial right-wing author who had consistently held the position that homosexuality is against Indian family values. What do you mean by family values? I asked him. We also have families. We are families. So I want to stop here. And thank you for inviting me to be part of this incredible conversation. I can't wait to see what Dhamini and Arvind and we're all going to talk about next.
Thank you so much, Parmesh. That was really beautiful. And, I think the role of parents has been so critical in the entire LGBT struggle. I mean, I think the very fact that parents actually, when at a stage when we could not find enough, gay and lesbian people who would come and be petitioners in the case, and people were not ready to be out, parents stepped in. And, a very crucial intervention was filed in the Delhi High Court and the Supreme Court by parents and friends of LGBT people, and around 30 parents participated from across the country. And of course, it actually became the most important case at that time. And but sure, I think eventually we obviously needed gay and lesbian people to come out, as Menika's case has proven. So I think I actually wanted to do something connect. TikTok shut down, but Devdutt Patnaik actually sent me a whole bunch, this whole kind of window into this incredible gay subculture from small town India that uses TikTok, or was using TikTok, to celebrate their lives. And we've actually sort of collected some of these videos, and I'm going to ask Reggie to play some videos before we move on to Dhamini. They're quite amazing. I know Mario is here, and he was also talking about TikTok, so I'm sure Mario is smiling.
सर्व गुरु केला दिसवोतीले कानात मला दाविले भगवंत आंबा आंबा धीर धीर जी जी आंबा तू माझे गा येडू तू माझे गा हे आंबा हे
हाय दोस्तों, आइए खाना खा लो। हाय, ये दो खा लो खा लो खा लो।
పడమట సంధ్యారాగం కుడియడమల కుసుమ పరాగం ఒడిలో చెలి మోహన రాగం ఒడిలో చెలి మోహ
लड़कियां नहीं पसंद, लड़के पसंद है। कोई नहीं समझ रहा, कोई बात नहीं, सब समझ जाएंगे, क्योंकि ये 1920 नहीं है, 2000।
हमारा क्या है, हम तो वैसे ही बदनाम है जमाने में। अरे फिक्र तो वो करे जिनके गुनाह अभी तक पर्दे में है।
भाई जो सिंगल है, जिनकी गर्लफ्रेंड नहीं है, जो गे है, जिसका बॉयफ्रेंड नहीं है, कोई लेस्बियन है, उसको लेस्बियन नहीं मिल रही, तो मेरे इंस्टाग्राम पे जाओ, मैंने सेल लगा रखे हैं। गर्लफ्रेंड बॉयफ्रेंड के, गे फ्रेंड के, सबके लिए मिलेगा रिश्ता। जिसको लेना है आ जाओ मेरी लाइफ पे।
हाय फ्रेंड्स, एक लड़की ने कमेंट्स किया है कि लिपस्टिक ना लगाए ये लड़कियों के लिए। तो क्या उस पर लिखा है कि लड़कियां ही लगाए लड़के ना लगाए? नहीं ना। और तुम लड़की होकर के जीन्स, स्पोर्टिंग, शॉर्ट, जूते, ये ना जाने क्या क्या तुम लोग पहन सकती हो, तो हम लोग लिपस्टिक क्यों नहीं लगा सकते? हाँ, लगाएंगे रे लिपस्टिक।
अस्सलाम वालेकुम, मैं आई थी निहाल बिहार। अस्सलाम वालेकुम, मेरे मालक जी आए थे, मैं खुश हो गई। मेरे मालक जी आए थे, माँ सबको अस्सलाम वालेकुम।
आज मैं आई थी निहाल बिहार मेरा चेला आयशा की घर में। मुझे बहुत अच्छा लगा। अल्लाह मेरा आयशा को अच्छा रखे, खुश रखे। देखो
सब आए, मेरे बच्चे भी आए साथ में मम्मी के।
मेरे हड्डी है। एवढा गुरु गबाई मी केला, हाती विभूताची वडी, गुरुच्या मांडीवर शुद्ध झाली माझी कुडी, गुरुच्या मांडीवर शुद्ध झाली माझी कुडी, झाली माझी कुडी शुद्ध झाली माझी कुडी, झाली माझी कुडी शुद्ध झाली।
मुझे पता है मेरा लिपस्टिक लगाना, लड़कियों की तरह कपड़े पहनना, उनकी तरह दिखना, इन सब से आपको दिक्कत है, इन सब से आपको एतराज है। लेकिन मैं आपको बता दूं कि ये मेरी पसंद है। और यहाँ पर सबसे जरूरी बात, मैं इंसान हूं।
भाई मोदी जी ने कहा थाली बजाओ, थाली बजा लिया। मोदी जी ने कहा कि भाई दीपक जलाओ, दीपक जला लिया, हमने भी जला लिया। कल के मोदी जी कहे साड़ी पहन लो, लिपस्टिक लगा लो, लड़कियों की तरह तैयार हो जाओ सारे मर्द, और अपने अपने बालकनी में खड़ा होकर हाय हाय करो, तो कौन कौन करेगा बता दो।
That was really amazing. I think we can just keep watching these TikTok videos. There's just a whole world to it. Obviously, I think these great performers and who archive queer life on TikTok have just moved on to different platforms. But it just, Dhamini, I'd really like to invite you to speak now. And it's amazing, right? What a journey from small town India, from Leela and Urmila's story to sort of a small town India across India celebrating gay love. And I'm sure somewhere, and I think, I mean, I don't know if I'm allowed to say this, but I think one of our amazing co-petitioner in the Navtej case, Ritu Dalmia, is in the audience. Somewhere the sort of, the bravery of Navtej has given confidence, right? Somewhere it has translated into confidence across the nation. And also, I mean, and looking back, I mean, the Bharosa story and all of that is very important. But what a journey we've made.
Yes, and I'm sure, Alok, you would be better placed to talk about this journey than me for sure. But before I start, I just want to thank Thus Critic, and I want to thank you all for inviting me here. It's actually pretty amazing to be here and to talk about this. And well, the book that I'm supposed to be working on. But before I begin, firstly, I actually wanted to also, share that actually the first article that I actually wrote about LGBT lives was commissioned by Parmesh. And I don't know if Parmesh remembers this, but back in 2010, when I was in Bombay and I had just joined the Hindustan Times at that time, I took special permission from my editor because Parmesh at that time was managing editor, if I'm not wrong, of Verve, right? And, and we met through a common friend and, he said, oh, this pride is happening. Why don't you write a nice long piece about it? So not only was that my first piece that I wrote on anything remotely connected to LGBT, but also it was one of the first long form pieces that I wrote per se. And I mean, I'm so thankful to Parmesh to, give me that opportunity because it was eye-opening. So for me, the journey into writing about LGBT lives has also been very contiguous to my own understanding of my sexuality as a queer woman, understanding what queerness politically means. I know you've invited me here to sort of talk about chronicling this, and I'm more of a writer than a speaker, so I'm not going to take 10 minutes. I'm probably going to take, much lesser than 10 minutes. But I think that Parmesh's book and even, in fact, some other books that have come out post the Navtej verdict. For instance, Pawan Dhal's book had come out, which is Online Offline, where he talks about activism in the 90s in Eastern India. I think the importance, and of course, the whole host of books that have come through the decades, I think so that's the importance of these books cannot be, stressed upon enough. And that's, I think, for two reasons, primarily, the way I look at it, and kind of also what informs why I'm doing what I'm doing or what I'm hoping to do. So one is, in order to be able to understand where we're going forward as a movement, right? And what constitutes the movement. It's so important to kind of look back and see where we've come from. And I think that the one thing that it is helping me to do, the question that I ask myself is actually, how is it possible, that we're living in this world that we're living in right now? What is happening in this world right now, right? In the 90s, we've all read Less Than Gay, right? We've read that amazing manifesto, which was, brought out by the AIDS Bhedbhav Virodhi Andolan, authored by Siddharth Gautam and other members of the ABVA. And I think that particular document itself showcases just the compendium of just the worst kind of violences, right? That people from marginalized communities, including those who belong to sexually marginalized communities, gender marginalized communities, what they have been through. And here we are in 2020, 30 years later, right? And we're talking about same-sex marriage petitions. So, and if you think about it, and of course, so chronicling so for me, actually, the journey is really about just chronicling all of these things that have led us to where we are today, right? And of course, there is no way in which one can ever capture an entire movement. And I think that books like Parmesh's are important because what they do is that they're also testimonials. Because what Parmesh does is that he's also talking about his own activism, even as he's creating this manifesto for businesses, right? Making a case for inclusion. But it's important because it's showcasing exactly what people have done in order to get here. So for me, that's where I, come in, and I'm just sort of like, I'm riveted by this. One of the stories that I wrote a few years back was on Dominic D'Souza, right? Now, part of this great enterprise of chronicling stories is that you also end up finding out and reading up and speaking to people, about people that you didn't really know about events that you really don't have too much of an understanding about. What alerted me first, in fact, to Dominic, apart from, of course, conversations with multiple people, but also the book that came out called No One Else, Siddharth Dubey's book, right? Because he talks about Dominic at great length there. And Sopan, who was here, I think at that time had invited Anand, and they were doing some sort of like a film screening of the Bollywood movie that had come out, My Friend Nikhil, and so on. So that's when I sort of started getting interested to find out more about Dominic. And what I understood from that, right, was Dominic's bravery, right, was multifold, right? So for the benefit of our listeners, of course, Dominic D'Souza was this 29-year-old. When he came back to India, he was on a ship. He was working with, I think, the World Wildlife Fund. And he returned to his home in Para in Goa. And one fine day, a policeman comes and asks him to come to the station. And before he knows it, he's basically been arrested because, a blood report he used to donate blood very regularly, right? So a blood report lands on the desk from the medical superintendent, lands on the desk of the police superintendent in that particular area and reaches this particular Para police station. He's called in because he's found to be positive. And this was a time when there was a particular act that was, in play in Goa, which basically sort of wanted people who are positive to be sent out of Goa. So there was no conception of somebody who's from Goa to be positive, right? So this was meant for people who come from outside the country. So he was incarcerated in a sanitarium. And his struggles, right, against the state is only matched by his mother's sort of immediate sort of like connection with what is happening to her son, even though she may not have known too much about what HIV was, or, so she read up about the law, she reached out to some experts. I remember speaking to a theater teacher of Dominic, who, narrated to me what all they did, the process through which they went to learn about what's happening with Dominic and actually eventually come together, take out protests, speak to, the members of the parliament, members of the legislature in Goa, to tell them what is going on. I mean, how can you actually incarcerate somebody here? And of course, Anand Grover then comes in, who then went on to, of course, lead the fight against the NAS petition. So it's these small connections that get made, right? And how this sort of case progresses. And for me, also, of course, Dominic being, the sort of brave soul that he was, but for me, what also struck me was his mother, the parent. You guys were talking about parents, right? His mother's empathy, her radical empathy towards, what was going on with her son, and even the empathy of his neighbors. So last year, I actually made a trip down to Para. I had no idea where Dominic lived. And I just wanted to see if his house is still there. I mean, are his neighbors around? Do they, And I ended up reaching the wrong neighborhood. And there were these pair of old ladies who were, sort of in this afternoon, sort of like driving by on their scooty. So they see me like, looking pretty lost, and they're like, okay, where are you from? Where are you going? And I tell them, I'm looking for Lucy D'Souza's house. Which Lucy D'Souza? The one who went to Canada? Yeah, I think so. Yes. Oh, okay. This is not the place. Come, I'll take you. So I'm ferried to the right house, which is now completely run down. And, there are brambles and bushes growing everywhere. And and of course, there are lots of dogs sort of like barking and like, like, what's the stranger doing over here? So I'm standing there and I'm trying to figure out, okay, where to go from here, because everything is looking very Sinsan. Plus it's siesta time, it's Goa. And I'm like, what was I thinking, And suddenly from nowhere, this lady comes out. And she's a neighbor of Lucy D'Souza and the family. And she invites me into her home and she starts telling me about Dominic. And, he used to bake cakes and he was like such a great chef. And, and her daughters, one of whom actually happened to even be in the house then, sort of narrating to me how amazing Dominic was. So it's exactly this. It's the chronicling of these little sort of, events of these people, the connections that they made. And I think that is what brings me to life. That is, for me at least, that's what brings the story of this movement to life, right? All these connections that get made. Now, I think that, this is probably not the best segue, but I'm also just sort of thinking about what's happening right now, right? We're in a post-Navtej scenario. We, after this long protracted battle against Section 377, we're at a stage now where we're really thinking about inclusion. And I'm really glad that, this is really the center of our discussion at this point, because that's what Parmesh's book is also about. It's about inclusion. And I just want to end with this, that I think that inclusion comes in various forms. And when we think about inclusion within the context of LGBT lives, right? Marriage is definitely one of the aspects of inclusion. We know that there are 4 petitions right now, right? 3 before the Delhi High Court, 1 before the Kerala High Court. And multiple acts have been challenged. The Special Marriage Act has been challenged. The Hindu Marriage Act has been challenged. So has the Foreign Marriage Act. I hope I've got that terminology right.
Yeah.
Right? Now, this is very important. And I think it was Ruth Vanita who first talks about marriage in her book called Love's Rights, if I'm not wrong, where she used this phrase, which I thought was actually very beautiful. She talks about how in the absence of these rights, there is no social recognition of loss. And I think that that's very, very vital. It's very important to understand the lack of this social recognition and what it does, right, to lives. At the same time, I think that there needs to be also a recognition of other kinds of inclusion that is needed within communities. Parmesh talked about, the reality of our lives. We have chosen families, right? Many of us are single, right? Many of us belong to gharanas. So the idea of what constitutes family, the idea then of, is family just centered around marriage? If not, what are the ways in which one can imagine rights and inclusion that is about marriage and that is also about other kinds of partnerships? I think that is a conversation that I am deeply interested in finding more about, because that is what chronicling has taught me. Chronicling all these stories has taught me, is that it's actually been a fight for inclusion, but it's also been a fight for recognition of existing realities, right? So inclusion, yes, but a deep recognition that this is my reality. And whether you accept it or not, this is my reality. And so how does one, as a community, think about these multiple realities, right? Which of course vary with caste, vary with gender identities, vary with sexualities, and think about inclusion in all these various ways. I think so. So essentially, I think that if this book, if it ever happens, will not only look at the past and chronicling the connections, but I think also try and answer, okay, so how have we reached here? And now that we're here, where do we go? So yeah, that's it from me.
Thank you so much, Dhamini. Thanks a lot. And really thank you for telling us the story of Dominic, because I think also because we are in Goa right now, and Dominic's story is so important because not only he was also the first sort of recorded, sort of documented gay man, openly a gay man who was infected with HIV and was criminalized in the country. And in many ways, Dominic played a very similar role like Siddharth Gautam, because and Anand tells a story beautifully, because Anand made a promise to Dominic, and sort of Anand led on to that promise by fighting for rights of both people with HIV and also for the LGBTQ community.
And Anand never fails to mention it. Every time he talks about Dominic, he talks about his deathbed promise that he made to him, that he will always fight for the rights of HIV, and then therefore going forward from their other marginalized communities.
So it's wonderful that actually we are having this discussion, sort of hosting it from Goa, because it's a wonderful contribution of Goa to the struggle. And in fact, as I invite my friend Arvind now to speak, I was mentioning this earlier, that and Arvind and I have this memory of Goa that it'll never escape us, because we had come to Goa in 2007, if I'm not mistaken. This is when the Delhi High Court case was already going on, and we actually did not have a real documented case of somebody who was arrested under 377. And an Englishman called Desmond Hope, which went on to become the Hope case, who was a tourist in India with his boyfriend, was arrested under Section 377 by the Kolba police station in South Goa, and he was, his only crime actually was that he refused to pay the bribe. That was his essential crime. And because he didn't pay the bribe, he was arrested and he was in jail for 30 days. And in the sort of climate of Goa, the case got misrepresented as a case of a pedophile. Bail was denied. And then finally, after a lot of campaigning and a lot of work, he was finally granted bail. But I wanted to sort of recollect that with Arvind, because if Arvind recollects, despite the trauma that Desmond Hope went through, a year later, when Desmond Hope was back in England, we wrote to him and we said that we would like you to give us an affidavit, or we'd like to use your story in the Delhi High Court case. And he was, the thing about striking about Desmond when we met him was that Desmond is not white. So Desmond's family are Trinidadian Indians. And so he was this sort of Indian-looking boy, but from Caribbean, from England, who was arrested. And he actually gave his story, and it went on to become a very important sort of account of persecution of gay people that was recorded in the 377 case in the Delhi High Court and in the Supreme Court. So it was another really great contribution. I mean, Arvind, Leela and Urmila, Desmond Hope, Dominic D'Souza, so many great warriors, people who've kind of really sort of on whose back we've fought this struggle. And we've come here, and I think I do acknowledge the celebratory note in Parmesh's book, and I really do think there is reason to celebrate, especially with the kind of incredible dialogue and inclusion that we are seeing. But how do we understand it? How do we understand this in today's India? I mean, today's India is a very different India. It's gays and transgender people may not be getting arrested, but it's a very different India. And how do we voice a responsible, ethical, queer voice in that kind of a space, and also talk about the future of the queer movement? Thanks.
Thank you. Thanks, Alok, for the invitation. Also, thanks to both Parmesh and Dhamini for the sharing and the incredible work which both of you are really doing. And perhaps you did mention our friend Siddharth Gautam, and I did speak about the report Less Than Gay and the really very poignant and moving beginning point. It begins by a tribute again to a Black American gay writer who some of you would have read, called James Baldwin. And he quotes James Baldwin, who says, the victim who's able to articulate the condition of his or her victimhood is no more a victim. He or she has become a threat. So in a sense, Siddharth Gautam really set in place that idea that when you break the injunction to silence, you're in many ways beginning the LGBT struggle or the LGBT movement itself. And that moment from 1991, and we come to Parmesh and post 2018, when we're really talking about the celebratory moment, is really something which we have to acknowledge as being a very important, very powerful moment. But I want to go back to the Navtej judgment and in a sense look at some of the paths ahead which are embedded in the judgment itself. And one path which I found particularly important in moving, particularly in your of the right to marriage, is what Justice Chandrachud says in the judgment. He says, talking about the right to love, he says the right to love is not just a right for the LGBT community, it's a right for all of us. And he goes on to make a very important point. He says, when you talk about carnal intercourse against the order of nature, he says, what is against the order of nature? In the context of a heterosexist society, quite obviously, it's a question of the fact that relationships could be man-man or woman-woman, which are considered against the order of nature. But in a context such as India, where caste is an important reality, where religion is an important reality, if you love across lines of religion or caste, as this history of this country has shown, you are liable to be chased by a family, some cases even killed by your own family members. And just think of it. Family members who brought you up, your parents, are happy to kill you because you violated the sense of honor of the community. Or what you violated is what, in a broadest possible sense, is the order of nature. So I think in some ways, when we're referring to the challenge of the marriage laws, there's also a deeply political dimension to that challenge. And I'll put it this way. India, we know, is a country in which marriage is a relationship which is really a relationship set in place by family members. It's meant to solidify what families want their kids to do, to perpetuate the understanding of the family or the community itself. And when people choose to marry across lines of caste or religion, what they're doing is they're asserting their right to individuality. They're saying that, community may believe some things, or family may believe other things, but we have a certain internal desire, a certain kind of a love, and we will marry, or we will go with the person that we love. And that's the articulation of the right to marry as a right of personal, right of individuality, as a part of your right to dignity. And it's a very important challenge to the notion of marriage as a community-based institution. And I think that the law which recognizes that at its heart is really the Special Marriage Act. And again, I think, Alok, you know this, the history of the Special Marriage Act shows it's been a subject of enormous struggle. The Special Marriage Act is imperfect. It's in many ways still allows families a role to determine the choices of their children. But in spite of that, it's a very important inroad into the idea that marriages are something families decide for you. So I think if you put it that way, as a right to love, as a radical questioning of the norms of family and norms of community, I think when we look at the same-sex marriage, it's one step in that similar direction, where we're saying that, we're going to challenge marriage. Again, you go back to your bit in the annihilation of caste. The point he makes is marriage in most societies is an ordinary incident of social life. But in the context where you can't marry across lines of caste, it assumes a deeply revolutionary significance. And annihilation of caste, one of the strategies he puts forward in terms of the annihilation of caste is love across lines of caste and religion. So I think there's something very radical about the marriage project in the Indian context. That being said, I completely agree with Dhamini that that's only one dimension of a range of struggles in which LGBT people are embedded. I'll give you one last example, maybe end with that. And we all know the question of the lockdown and the kind of impact that the lockdown had. And in the Karnataka High Court, one of the petitions filed was for the right to food, as far as in particular the transgender community. We know that in the context of a lockdown, again, when Mr. Modi says that it's a lockdown, go inside your homes, maintain your social distancing, I think it's something all of us should do because we have the privilege and the ability and the responsibility to do that. But what Mr. Modi seems to be ignoring is that a large majority of people in this country don't have the same privilege. They don't have the sense of privacy. They don't have the sense of home. They're not able to maintain that social distancing because there are 10 people living in a small little house. And it is in a context such as that, that when you impose a lockdown of this kind of a severity without any planning, without any making provision for people, what we've experienced in the Karnataka context is the transgender community was left abandoned. Because the point again is, what is the ability to negotiate a decision such as this? In the middle class, we have certain ability to negotiate it because we have certain resources. But if you happen to be living on a day-to-day, if you're daily wage earner, and if your food tomorrow depends on your work yesterday, then you're in a very difficult, a very vulnerable position. So I'll just end with that and say that I think there are a range of, as Dhamini rightly put it, marriage is a very important issue in terms of the way we're thinking about it, and also in terms of the idea of, as she beautifully put it, that there must be a social recognition of loss, and that's something people want. There must be a social recognition of a relationship. You can't be invisible for the rest of your lives, and that's a very important dimension of the marriage question. But it's not the only question. There's a question of discrimination at the workplace. There's a question of you being at the lower end of the socioeconomic strata and your ability to negotiate really difficult decisions which the government may impose upon you. So I think there are a range of challenges which we have to confront. And perhaps another direction to think of, taking up from Parmesh's work, is the idea of a non-discrimination law, where we have to look at the question that people face discriminatory attitudes and discrimination in the context of the workplace, in the context of their living arrangements, in the context of rental agreements, in a range of spaces, really. So we have to think of relationship recognition, we have to think of non-discrimination, and we have to think in some sense of addressing the structures of social and economic marginalization as well. So I think we're we've come a long way, and that's 100% about that. Because if you'd asked me in 1999, will the 377 go in your lifetime? I'd have said no. There's no question. We're doing this for the future generation. Would have been my answer. But that answer, obviously, we've found some kind of a end point too. But there are new struggles ahead and new paths ahead. And I think there's a famous poem which Nehru is very fond of, which ends Robert Frost stopping by the woods on a snowy evening. It says, "The woods are lovely, dark and deep, but I have miles to go before I sleep, and I have promises to keep." And I think that's really the place I think we are at. And maybe since I'm on a poetry line, one last poem, I'll just go and end with this. We were, again, when 2013, the judgment came about, which is a deep disappointment. I remember our friend Akhil Katel quoted this poem again, or in Hindi, again by a Black American gay poet called Langston Hughes. It goes something like this: "What happens to dreamed effort? Does it dry up like a raisin in the sun? Does it run like stinking meat, or does it explode?" And his point was, the Supreme Court may impose this judgment upon us, but our dream will explode. So the question I think we're left with is the dream exploding?
Thank you, Arvind. I think dream is exploding. I think this is what's really fascinating, right? That I actually think that I want to make an additional point that I think what Parmesh is, I think there's a sort of a symbiotic relationship with the idea of economic inclusion and marital inclusion, social inclusion, with all the challenges we have in a society, because it sort of creates a legitimacy that is otherwise lacking for people seeking employment, queer people seeking employment access and non-discrimination, and also queer people seeking social sanction to marry. And I think so they have this power of legitimizing in a way that sort of supports both of these things, and I think that's really important. Thank you, guys, and I think this is really great. And I'm really excited that in the audience we have Ashwini Sukthankar, our dear old friend who wrote Facing the Mirror. I'm just talking about chronicling, We have Mario De Pena, who's an amazing historian, queer historian. We have Jaya was around. I still see Jaya. We have Jayashri who's running this incredible archive in Bangalore and made this incredible documentary about the 377 movement at that time. In fact, I mean, and the process of the chat, our conversation, Sopan just privately messaged me and said that he has actually made a documentary on Dominic called The Dominic's Dream. And I think it's just wonderful, like actually in many ways, that I think this is it's an incredible experience of Indian queer people, that because we have been part of this incredible movement, we've all become archivists in some way. And we've all been archiving the sort of movement in our own ways. And many people, many desires. Yes, Parmesh, that was Jayashree's documentary. And we've all been archiving, writing, documenting this incredible movement and the changes that are happening, and also understanding the sort of incredible complexities and diversities of the struggle. Guys, I'd like to open up a little bit. If we have some videos to show, we also have a lot of people in the audience. I really request people to share comments and thoughts and questions. Generally at dusk, by this time, we actually tell everyone to put their cameras on, so it becomes a little like a chat, and so you don't need to hide behind your this thing. You can come out. Everyone can come out and show us your faces if you want to. Hey, Fernando. And so I think it'll be really lovely. Oh wow! And then Ashwini is also here. Wonderful. Ashwini's put a camera on. Hi, Ashwini. It's early in the morning for you. So yeah, I think I'd really like people to just maybe, you can even unmute yourself, raise your hand, ask us a question. We can have a conversation. It'd be wonderful. Okay. Sorry. You know what? Let me start. I think Dhamini, there was Jaya is asking me a question. Do panelists have any concerns? Okay, let me read a question from Jaya, guys. Do panelists have any concerns about the implications of same-sex marriage for exclusion based on respectability? The married couple will be the respectable ones. The danger of reducing the importance of queer families not limited to sexual relationships. The importance of activist agendas such as those related to the living will inheritance outside of coupledom. And I'm really glad Jaya asked that question, because actually in a really Siddharth Gautam actually phrases a really interesting question in Less Than Gay, and he says that why do I have to love someone to get married? Why can't I get married to my friend? And something that Dhamini also questions. You also question Saurabh. But it also ties into this complicated idea that while we are seeking marriage, we're also sort of legitimizing this structure of sanction, that we kind of have to work and operate within that. And it's a double-edged sword. We want it, but it also kind of ties up within that structure. And Parmesh, would you like to talk about that a little bit? I mean, I know the marriage is so important to everyone. I get it.
Yes. Jaya, I mean, personally, yeah, I grapple with this every day in terms of, where I stand on it, in terms of what it will empower versus what it might exclude, both at a personal level as well as at a political level. At the same time, I also grapple with my own desires, with my own, I think, inherent, conditioning. And I question also because, if you ask me, would I want to get married? I'm 44 now. I've been wanting to get married for the past, I would say, 30 years or so. And where does this wanting to get married come from? Right? So, I mean, just Jaya, to answer you, do I have any concerns about this? Yes. It's all the time. And it's not just this that I have concerns about, right? I'm deeply conflicted about, my stance and the perspective I've chosen to take in the book. This rosy picture that I'm painting, this glass is half full, this particular perspective of hope and optimism that I recognize is necessary for my stated objective. But in choosing to focus on what is working and with a hopeful perspective, am I overlooking, brushing under, not focusing enough on the serious structural inequalities within not just our country, but within our queer movement? And in this whole section whereby, I mean, I hinted at it earlier, where before I make a case for why one should include, money, innovation, etc. I mean, in the book itself, there's a chapter that says it's essentially a decent thing to do. And then I spend a whole chapter writing about what does it mean to be decent and do the decent thing. I mean, in an ideal world, one wouldn't have to state such things. In an ideal world, actually, one wouldn't even have to argue that you should include us because we make you more money, right? You should include us because we're human. So yeah, I'm deeply conflicted every day about marriage, but also about the other stances that I take in terms of what I choose, how I choose to do my advocacy versus what I grapple with here and here. So yeah.
Thank you for that, Parmesh. I just as I pass the mic to either Arvind or Dhamini, I mean, Sammy asked a really important question, which is sort of connects to that. And this is something which is a central question in queer activism. Isn't marriage a heteronormative proposition? How does our queerness deal with this dichotomy? I mean, and I think this is, I mean, I mean, Arvind and Dhamini, which one would you like to, I mean, I know this is something you all thought about a lot, okay? And, okay, let me say this. I have been with my partner for 21 years. If same-sex marriage is legalized through the Special Marriages Act, I'm going to get married. Because I'm totally going to get married because he has a very sweet piece of beach land in Chennai and his mother's never going to give it to me if I'm not married to him. So hell yes, I'm going to get married.
I'm not agreeing to this, but anyway.
But Doc, you have a question, come.
Yeah, hi. So, okay, I'm going to hijack this to ask a question. Well, it's a very topical question. I mean, I want to ask all the panelists, like from what they know about their friends, the communities that they're part of, how has COVID affected the community? And I'm asking this, because in some ways it's been positive. I mean, for instance, like because of COVID, for the first time after 21 years of being together, Alok and I are actually living together. But on the other hand, so much of what we've built over the last few years has been about the community coming together, about coming out of our closets, about meeting, about prides, about festivals like Kashish, and suddenly all that is no longer possible. So I just want to ask all the panelists, like, and of course we're hearing stories of people coming, mental problems, depression. There's certainly been a lot of suicides. And again, there are issues again of couples. If one of us were to fall sick with COVID, I mean, this is the thing about marriage. I mean, when we go to hospital, would we be able to see each other in hospital? So, a whole range of issues thrown up by that.
Well, just a quick point on that the community is very broad and diverse. But I just mentioned a little bit actually that it's a very negative impact, particularly on the trans community. And I'm mentioning this in terms of the petition which was filed, in terms of an issue which we might not even think of as an issue, right? Here's a petition filed saying your right to food, saying that, when we're deprived of livelihood and we have no way of getting food, then the state has an obligation to provide us rations. That's the fundamental effect. It's as fundamental as that. When some people don't have enough to eat, and other people are saying, hey, we're concerned with social distancing norms, and saying that such diverse realities in this country, right? And I just want to mention that part of it. I think the other dimensions maybe Parmesh and Dhamini can also speak about.
No, so I think that to take forward Arvind's point, of course, it has had a very negative impact on some members of the community. But the thing is that how do we then understand community in this context of COVID, right? So for example, women who are, within sort of say domestic spaces where they face abuse, where, they may have wished to sort of, leave home, may have tried to seek state help or help of shelter homes, have not been able to do it because shelter home officials were not designated as essential services. So and also so that then, people with disabilities, for instance, how did they get access? How would they get access to medical care, which was so essential and needed for them? So, I mean, also, various members of the community facing various kinds of, in non-COVID times, various kinds of discrimination, how those got deepened during COVID. I think that is something that we're all sort of, and that's something that I was also trying to chronicle at some level, through multiple conversations with people and through my podcast and some stories. Arvind's point of the right to food petition itself, of course, is a very big, indication. One thing that I also saw and, sort of documented was how so many people who did not have the luxury of social distancing really actually came out to volunteer help. And this was particularly seen, I mean, within trans communities as well, that there was this huge concerted effort, particularly in states like Tamil Nadu, for instance, where a lot of people came out to actually help other trans men, women, and other members of the community, intersex members of the community. So I think that, yeah, the effect has been very deep. But it has also led to a lot of effort on part of community members as well, to address this. So, yeah.
I think, this is, well, I mean, the trans community's kind of been in the, actually, I've seen some really great stuff on the trans community, members of the trans community feeding just poor people in general, fundraising for poor people in general. Creating support systems for poor people in COVID across their own communities. It's been really incredible. It's been really incredible. I want to go back to some of the marriage questions because I haven't. So there was a question from Abhira on. Sorry, Arvind.
There's one line to that.
Please, Arvind. Sorry.
Just one line. That in the context of a pandemic, the other thing we've realized is people on the margins become even more invisible, or get even, as Dhamini rightly indicated, completely fall off the lens, And that's why the right to food petition had to be filed, right? Because when the right to food petition was filed, the various people everybody is in distress, right? You're talking about slum communities, you're talking about migrant labor, a range of groupings were in deep distress. But when that distress came in, sex workers and trans people just fell off the page, They just weren't there. So it's also for us to think about what happens to marginalized people in the context of something like a pandemic. And that's I think the point we have to think about, because it's it's easier to think of marginalized communities in the context when there is no immediate crisis. When a crisis comes, then they just fall off the radar. And we could think about it, right? The discussion should be, if you're talking about sex workers, I'm like, your right to livelihood is gone, right? So what is the state? Has the state made any effort to make provision for these groups and communities? And that's the question one has to ask. And why isn't it in people's heads? Why are people not thinking about this? And that's the structural way I think disasters work, to push marginalized communities to further the edges, as it were, and sometimes completely off the table.
And will you also add to that the Bangalore case, where in the Bangalore case, these various different petitions were clubbed, and then Justice Oak passed orders directing the government to look at various marginalized communities, and it clubbed poor communities, migrant workers, transgender communities, all of that, if I'm not mistaken. Am I right? And so did any positive change come from the court's directions?
See, the way the courts function, at least in terms of the Karnataka context, is what you broadly call a nudge jurisdiction. Right? It's very intelligent way in which the courts utilize their power to shame the state into performing its constitutional obligations, saying, do you have the obligation to provide everybody with the right to food? And the answer the state comes with, yes. In that case, what are you doing about it? The state will come up with a response saying that, we're providing these kind of ration kits. Then the question is, is that enough? And so they kept nudging. And finally, the state, if you look at it, nobody finally starved during the pandemic in terms of, because the state was finally pushed into fulfilling its obligations, point one. And secondly, civil in a very strong way. And that's the beautiful part, I think, of this country, right? Where different people in different parts of the country came in, and as Dhamini indicated, in terms of the trans community, and so many people came in and said, we will not let people starve. And it's really moving, I think, during the entire thing. The migrant crisis as well, the range of people who came together saying, we have to do something about this. But in all this, again, I think the question we have to ask is, where were the queer voices? And can we, and that's, Dhamini, that's your book, right? What were the queer voices at this moment, really, right? And the stories of inspiration, again, taking on Parmesh's theme, stories of hope, and stories of people in the most difficult circumstances willing to do so much, in terms of for the entire community, as it were.
But was there a hint of criticism also? And if there is, I'd like to understand it, because I think we should articulate it. Do you think the privileged queer community did not do enough for the marginalized queer communities through the COVID lockdowns? Was there a sort of an absence of concern? Because suddenly, also COVID kind of shut us in, right? People just shut themselves in. Not everybody was out there volunteering and donating and doing all of that. So do you think there was I felt particularly that I think there was a sort of a lack of privileged queer people, urban privileged queer people making sure that resources were made available to the marginalized communities of sex workers and transgender communities. I think that was a really huge gap. And I'm sure if we actually went around and spoke to transgender people, they will express that criticism. And I think this is something we should think about. So yes, I'd like to now sort of go back to the marriage issue a little bit. And I think there's some really interesting points emerging. And, Mario raised a really interesting point. And I'll come also to Abra Singh Roy's point. And I think Abra's point is, let me first address Abra's point. I think Abra's point is something that Arvind has kind of talked about. So let me just read it out. Abra says, also endogamy is something that has been a regressive force in our country, being deeply about caste, religion, and caste. Also, among the many legal propositions for same-sex marriage, one of them is within the Hindu Marriage Act, which seems probably would be dealt with because of its possible ways of polarizing Muslims and Dalits. Any comments about it? I'll just say quickly, Abra, actually, the interesting diversity of the queer community right now is that we actually have very strong queer Hindu voices that are sort of very strongly aligned with the BJP right. And it's quite just how things are right now. And so some members of those groups filed a case in the Delhi High Court, if I'm not mistaken, Dhamini, asking for same-sex marriage through the Hindu Marriage Act, not the Special Marriages Act. And the the BJP government basically kind of opposed that claim very strongly, saying that while the BJP supports the decriminalization of homosexuality under 377, it sees the demand for same-sex marriage as an affront to Hinduism. So that was really dismissed. So I don't think there is a route through the Hindu Marriage Act to amend and include same-sex marriage, but I understand your concern of pink washing. It's something that has always been a threat in our country, considering our government follows everything from Israel by the book. And it is, they would very much like to say that we are so progressive, we accept gay Hindus, but gay upper caste Hindus, all of us mostly. Anyway, but Mario said a very interesting thing, and I kind of connects to what Parmesh also said, and Dhamini also said, and Arvind also said, is that why are we not galvanizing as a movement, asking for an anti-discrimination law? I know that it's a really tough call, and our parliamentary procedures are very weak and things take a lot of time. So everybody goes to court because there's a hope that a court will actually grant quick decisions. But why don't we have a galvanized national movement asking for a central anti-discrimination law against LGBTQ people? Arvind.
Yeah, I think the point worth thinking about, again, I guess both Dhamini and Parmesh would be better able to put this, is what is it which moves people, right? What are the issues which have that ability to mobilize people around the country? 377 had that ability because it stood in for a range of things at the end of the day. It wasn't just a question of the sexual act, but it stood in for dignity, stood in for a sense of, freedom from being a second-class citizen. I think marriage has a similar kind of a pull because it's everybody's experience. Everybody knows that at some level or the other. I think the anti-discrimination law, we have to make it a more of a popular movement where people understand what its value and its importance is and build it as a campaign, saying that, I mean, Parmesh, you're the man on this. How do you do a campaign, right, which communicates the issue of discrimination and what discrimination could mean to you and why we need a law to address this, right? And that's the hard work which might need to happen. And on the marriage question, can I add one more line?
Sure, please.
A quick line on that is, I think if I can segue a little bit into since we had a number of questions on marriage, I mean, I agree with the sense of critique of the institution of marriage. But I think what we have to recognize, which I recognize at least, is that there are a range of voices with a range of different ways of thinking about this particular institution. And again, my friend Rumi in Bangalore, they made this very, very, very important point. They said that you speak to people, right from the people who are the poorest to people who are very, very well off. People want to get married, and that seems to be a reality which is there across the board. And the people who say it's a critique and have a problem with it and who understand the political dimensions of it, perhaps, are maybe people who are better educated or more educated, as it were. So how do you find a balance between the critique and the reality? And there is a possibility of doing that, because I think it's a question in some senses of putting forward or a critique more in more and more forums. Again, going back to the question, I mean, I want to just quote Marx on this point. Parmesh, don't laugh at me. It says that, the point about religion is the opium of the masses. But the previous part of it says, religion is the heart of a heartless world, is the sigh of the oppressed creature. It is the opium of the masses. So by which Marx is meaning to say that it's not you're not dismissing religion. You're saying it answers to some deep sense of meaningfulness as far as people are concerned. Because in a heartless world, it's something people go back to. That's his understanding. So in a similar sense, marriage seems to provide some sense of a security, some sense of recognition, something that answers very deep in people's need, And so if there are, I mean, to think creatively, I think in a queer sense, is how do you provide people with a sense of belonging and sense of need through alternative institutions? Can that become, in a way, something which gives people a sense of belonging? Because then your critique won't be a critique which is purely an abstract critique. It'll be a critique which will have a creative possibility embedded in it. What is the way forward? You'd be able to tell people that as well,
I think, sorry. Hi, Parmesh. Parmesh, you talk about the risk of tokenism, and I think you touch upon many caveats in your argument, and you kind of you sort of, I mean, I'm actually, to be honest, I wanted to ask you that some of these caveats, you caution a lot of caveats, and one of the most important caveats in the book is about how whether LGBT inclusion can just become a tokenism, and will it just be left there? And I think it really connects with this Mario's question about an anti-discrimination law. So yes, I think it's wonderful that we can do dialogue and talk to companies about hiring LGBTQ people and having policies towards them. But how do we create an environment, a sort of a culture where it's something that's just done? It's not done out of tokenism. It's protected.
Slowly and through multiple touch points. I mean, I think that's the thing. It's not going to happen overnight.
Of course.
And it is going to happen through, various methods, whether media, the impact of a show like Satyamev Jayate that everyone sees, the impact of an Amir Khan, having a range of individuals on the show. That one moment in that show where Ghazal Dhaliwal's parents accept her and say we went, to everyone's house and said our son is now our daughter, and we urged our neighbors to accept her, right? Did so much more for just understanding in that country, right? So I think there's multiple things that we need to do. But just to go back to the previous thing very briefly, I think I personally don't feel the need for us to have a hierarchy of what we should be fighting about next in the movement. I think, one of the things that has changed also in the past 20, 30 years is now there are so many people out there who are willing to engage with multiple struggles on multiple fronts, and that's a pleasure. So I don't think we should, why do we imagine that this world of justice out there is so limited that we need to kind of arrange our demands in some kind of hierarchy and say, we want this first, we want this next. Simply because that's how we did it with 377. Because we kind of felt we had to all galvanize around 377 doesn't mean that we need to follow the same template around marriage, right? We also have a terrible trans act, which is in play. And for a lot of people, including me, this is something that we have to like struggle against. So now there's enough of us to struggle on multiple fronts and say that this is also as important. Let's think about an anti-discrimination law. How would the contours of that be? For a large number of people, since marriage is important and since marriage seems to resonate a lot with mainstream society and can open this window for acceptance in multiple ways, how about that being one parallel front of struggle? So I'm just, I think we should. I talk about this briefly in the book, where Mona El-Tahawi uses this crumbs analogy and says that she uses this in the context of feminism and say, for so long we've been used to having these crumbs that we kind of fight for the crumbs even amongst ourselves, and we don't realize that we can have bigger pieces of the cake or we can bake bigger cakes for ourselves, right? So I don't think that we should be saying either or in terms of our struggles or our desires. I would like a better trans act that is not disrespectful to our trans brothers and sisters. I would like progress towards an anti-discrimination bill or laws. However, I think it's going to take longer though. And I would also like marriage equality, not just same-sex marriage, but a broader idea of what queer marriage can be. And the Vidhi, there's interesting, the Vidhi website has some interesting reports in terms of, there's a good report called Queering the Law that came out last year that looks at some of the future manifestations in terms of what would it mean to expand palimony or friendship into something deeper, right? So it's not just no marriage or marriage, but what are the contours of this, of widening this idea of this relationship? So, why can't we talk about all these things at the same time? Is my humble submission to all of us.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So yeah, and did you have a question? Sorry, I just went on.
I got excited. I just said absolutely. I completely agree with you.
Yeah, but what was your question? I forgot.
Oh, my question. I think you answered my question. Okay. I think you're right. But I only framed this because I thought all I'm trying to say is, and I think this is a really beautiful comment.
That tokenism. Yeah, I remember now. Yeah. No, I don't think we have to be fearful of tokenism. We are already living in tokenism. And this is that's also the point. Post this judgment, there were about 100 companies that released ads on Instagram, on Facebook, on Twitter, telling everyone, love has no boundaries. Everything was rainbow. But, Ritesh Rajani, who used to work at IBM and who now runs this very interesting organization called Diversity Dialogues with Madhumita Venkatraman, they actually looked at some of these ads and they did some research and found most of the companies who released these ads did not offer any of their employees, partnership benefits, insurance, or any of these things, right? They were just doing this kind of this. So my thing is, I think in today's world, students, employees, customers, etc., we are moving more and more towards a world in which people do their due diligence and do their homework. So if as an organization, whether it's a company or a college or anything, right? If any institution is saying that we are going on this journey towards being inclusive, you better walk the talk in terms of actually, doing all the various steps, right from policies, because one of the questions was, have there been instances where someone has been, fired, etc., for being discriminatory? You can only do that if you have it set that this is not good behavior, and hence you are doing this, and hence we are firing you, right? So if you're not investing in the multiple steps that you need to take, then all of this is tokenism, and you will be called out for it. That's the thing. In today's world, you can't escape. Whereas if you are doing the right thing, it might take longer. But then your employees, your customers, everyone around you, if you're an individual, your followers, your fans, etc., will appreciate you and then that will be the long-term impact. So I think tokenism is a short-term answer for some people who want to be cool or like ride this, whatever this idea is of, this rainbow moment, but it's not sustainable. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Parmesh. Dhamini, we are closing at 9 o'clock, and I wanted to actually ask you, I'm going to ask all of you to make a brief concluding comment as we end. And we'll just play 1 or 2 videos and we'll end. So another 5 minutes max. Dhamini, I wanted to actually ask you to conclude with, you told me as we started that you were working on a story about a lesbian couple from Gujarat. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Okay, so it's interesting because it's kind of like 33 years after Leela and Urmila's case, the 2 police women from Madhya Pradesh, who you began this conversation with talking about what happened to them. And just last week, I spoke with one of the police women of a couple who are based in Baroda and Gujarat, and they don't want their names revealed. But they had reached out to the Gujarat High Court a few months ago and managed to receive a protection order. And this has been happening a lot, in fact, post-Navtej, that a lot of lesbian couples particularly are reaching out to multiple courts around the country, high courts around the country, and seeking police protection from their own families. Because they want to stay together, and they're consenting adults, and yet they're not being sort of allowed to and permitted to, and in worst cases, of course, abused and beaten and so on. So this police couple went ahead and got this protection from the Gujarat High Court. And what is interesting is that they had performed a ceremony called Maitri Karar. And, and this is something that Maya Sharma writes about in her book, in her 2004 book, Loving Women, as a practice that, interestingly enough, actually has its origins, I think, after the HMA came up for, privileged upper caste Hindu men to seek some kind of validation for their quote unquote mistresses. So basically it allowed a certain kind of financial partnership, right, which was outside of the marriage. And so a lot of couples, in fact, same-sex couples or LGBT couples have been also, particularly in Gujarat, have been using the Maitri Karar as a way of like seeking some kind of social extra-legal validation, right? So this couple had done that and then approached the court, and the court recognized that they had done this and that they are adults and that, there is consent, and therefore they should have whatever protection that they need to stay. But what's interesting to me, and I was discussing this with my colleague Dhrubo, is that again, in terms of this, like what happened in 87 and what is happening in 2020, when I was talking to one of the women in this couple, she said, I asked her, okay, so did you face any problem from, your police station? She said, no, not at all. I said, okay, what about, the chief of your police station? She said, no, that's, in fact, the senior, I don't think it was a senior inspector. I think it was a higher rank, was a woman. She actually wrote a letter saying that, she wrote a letter to one of the police women's family saying that, please stay out of it. This is, their matter. You can't do anything to them. So there was that kind of support from their workplace. They lived together. They met each other when they were in police training school. They lived together since then, so their batchmates kind of knew or didn't know, but nobody was really, bothered them. And here I was, trying to dig in and to get, oh, but, did this happen? Did anything happen? And she was like, hey, all good. All we needed was police protection because, our family wasn't. And that for me actually was, it was a bit of a pause moment that, listen, there are these stories as well. So, yeah.
That was so beautiful, Dhamini. That's so beautiful. Arvind, a concluding comment, and then I will ask Parmesh to conclude in the end.
Yeah, no, I'll just maybe pick up from some of the comments which were made in the chat.
Please.
Both Jaya's comment as well as Ashwini's comment. And the idea that we are in some senses, very difficult and a very challenging moment in the history of this country, where the your right to dissent is very much under threat. And in particular, if you want to put it in a legal sense, the problem we have in terms of the law is the UAPA. And this is important for all of us to know, because under the UAPA, if you say or do something, or you're prepared to say or do something which the government in its wisdom considers to be either unlawful or a terrorist act, you could be put away in jail for up to 10 years. And that's just thinking about it is just shocking and so chilling. And especially activists who are fighting on issues of environment, activists who are fighting on issues of civil liberties, activists who are in any sense challenging the government, have been put away for years after years. And Dhamini, in terms of journalists, the guy who went to cover the Hathras rape from Kerala, he's been charged with the UAP and put away for, and as of now, he's not out on bail as yet. And just imagine, we're going to cover an incident from, what you were describing, if you're going to talk to somebody, right? And the police decide that is something which is problematic, and they file a case against the UAP under you. Because of the way the law is structured, you could spend up to 10 years in jail. And that's I think the very, very dangerous kind of a situation which we have to factor in terms of people who might want to challenge the state at some point in time. And I think, again, Alok, in terms of the challenge the state, I think it will come. When we're talking about the special marriage act, talking about Hindu marriage act, we're talking about the core of what it means to be religious. And these are not going to be easy fights. I think we're prepared for moving, in a sense. We've had a wonderful celebrative moment, but we're prepared for a longer struggle in terms of how we now fight with other social movements, the kind of forces which are going to oppress us, which are going to come for us. And I think it's important to be prepared and to understand the fact that, as we say, as Ashwini put it, all our struggles are connected, and your humanity, a threat to your humanity, also affects my humanity. And I think that's the philosophy which we need to, in a sense, engender and take forward. And that takes us, in a sense, back to the founding moment of what we call queerness, right? When we say, what do we mean by the word queer? What do we mean by the word queer? Is the fact that we see our struggles in some sense connected, and a battle for human dignity in one place is a battle for human dignity everywhere.
Thank you so much, Arvind. That's really, and I'm really glad you connected that so beautifully. Parmesh, I want to really thank you, because I think a book like Queeristan provides us a platform for having these discussions. And I think it's really important. I think the book is much more than you're thinking, because I think it's really, it's so incredible, because in many ways, and I want to connect with Arvind said, and I will give you a minute to speak. I think what Arvind, I think it's wonderful, actually. In many ways, what I like about the book, and I think this can also be, yes, there'll be contestation, there'll be struggles, but it creates an aspiration. And I think that plays a very, very important role in the lives of queer people. And I think, and I'd like you to sort of talk about that a little bit, because I'm sure that's something that's always, you have intended it.
Yeah, well, I just want to build off what Arvind and Ashwini said earlier as well, in terms of the last chapter of Queeristan is exactly that, right? It's a recognition that our struggles are connected. The title of the chapter itself is actually what the title of the book was, until we decided to change it. And the chapter is called Other Worlds Are Possible. And until recently, until late, we thought that is going to be the title of the book. And then, of course, we live in an age where things have to be hashtagable, and other worlds are possible is a mouthful, and Queeristan is easy. So we kind of just said, this is the title now. But I'm fundamentally, I think of that sentence all the time, right? And when are other worlds possible? When we recognize that your struggle is my struggle. And hence the last chapter of Queeristan is this grand recognition, at least in the context of the book, that all these changes will only happen when we recognize, in some sense, that our struggle for queer rights is linked to the anti-caste movement, is linked to the movement for the environment, globally is linked to Black Lives Matter. And how do we build these bridges of solidarity? Certainly, we need to build more bridges within the queer movement, for sure, but also with other movements, so that we can progress on these multiple fronts that we spoke about. In that context, just as a concluding comment, I think it would be very useful for people who are listening to follow. There's great work happening out there. So much of the work is there's Ya All in Manipur, for example, right? I spoke about Dalit Queer and Chinky Homo and Queer Muslim Project, etc. Many of these are like youth-led. many of these are hybrid models of online, offline. Many of them are space, solace, amplification of intersectional voices that then blends into, a physical community, etc. But I think engage with so many of these incredible young activists, young spaces which are coming about across our country to really understand where things are going ahead. So if anyone is seeing this, there's great work happening all across the country. So just like dig a little deeper and see, right? I mean, of course, it's very good to see a Shubh Mangal Jada or Ek Ladki Ko Dekha because it's on Netflix or whatever. But there's also Muthan, for example, right? So engage with, just see some of these narratives. And I think in these we will find, our answers are all there. We just have to see. So that's just what I want to say.
Thank you so much. And so much literature in different languages in the country, queer literature.
Yeah.
So guys, thank you so much. Thank you all so much for being there. Thank you, Parmesh. Thank you, Dhamini. Thank you, Arvind. Thank you for sort of, really taking us through the layers of the movement. And I think these are discussions we have to keep having. And I think it's wonderful. In many ways, it's wonderful that we are all sort of part of this struggle. And as Arvind says, cautions very correctly that it continues and continues in different ways. And as Jaya says, that for many of us, we are activists and we respond to the issues in front of us. And so guys, I'm going to just end with, maybe we'll play one song because we're in Goa, just a fun song, just to get you guys in a nice fun mood, and then you can go and have a drink. Reggie.
Hi, this is Peter Wallenberg. I'm in India. I'm in Bombay. I'm here to make a music album with Indian LGBT singers, but I don't know any.
In India, we've been made to believe that being gay is not okay. In ancient history, we've had LGBT characters, in fact even gods that have explored their more feminine side or the masculine side. And then we kind of had the colonial rule, wherein the rules that were made against homosexuality were by the British. And so these weren't our rules. And so if we're going to kind of say that homosexuality is a foreign import, it really isn't. Homophobia is. So if you have an opinion about gay people, it's fine, that's your opinion. I can't change it, but I'm not going to change myself to kind of fit your opinion of how a man should be or whatever. I'm gay. I'm not going to pretend to be something else to please you. Yeah.
Nobody should have the right to decide who somebody else should love. Love is love.
Guys, we're just ending with this song. You can just leave at any point during the song. And we are not in Maharashtra, we are in Goa, but we're sort of co-opting the song for Goa today because it's got a Goa vibe. Sound good.
Evening in gay Maharashtra, here we like it's full of life and so magnetic. Evening in gay Maharashtra, yes our ladies, they are gay and so romantic. When you're down in Maharashtra, you will like to do the things Maharashtrian way. Singing Mumbai Amchi Re, Amchi Amchi Mumbai Re, you like your stay in gay Maharashtra. Come and see our chopati and eat our chopati, tandoori chicken a la re. If you want to refresh our hill stations, our best Matheran, Mahabaleshwar and the rest. When you leave gay Maharashtra, you will always think of beautiful Bombay. Singing Mumbai Amchi Re, Amchi Amchi Mumbai Re, you love your stay in gay Maharashtra. Evening in gay Maharashtra, you will like it's full of life and so magnetic. Evening in gay Maharashtra, yes our ladies, they are gay and so romantic. When you're down in Maharashtra, you will like to do the things Maharashtrian way. Singing Mumbai Amchi Re, Amchi Amchi Mumbai Re, you'd like to stay in gay Maharashtra. Come and see our chopati and eat our chapati, tandoori chicken a la re. If you want to refresh our hill stations, our best Matheran, Mahabaleshwar and the rest. When you leave gay Maharashtra, you will always think of beautiful Bombay. Singing Mumbai Amchi Re, Amchi Amchi Mumbai Re, you love your stay in gay Maharashtra. You love your stay in gay Maharashtra.
Okay, guys, sorry the video quality was a little bit bad, but thank you all. Everyone's gone now. Bye. Bye, Jaya. Bye, Sopan. Bye, Reggie, Nilankup. See you guys.
Thank you, Alok. Bye.